guests and you know, our own chef and this kind of stuff. It was,
Wow.
it wasn't rough.
Wow.
Welcome. Today we're going to start the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for May 8th, 2025. Welcome. The first thing we're going to do is just read our disclosure of interest and make sure that is addressed from the top. So, any member of the commission who may have a conflict of interest or a possible conflict of interest regarding any item of business to be discussed at a commission meeting should declare that conflict of interest to enable a commission to manage the conflict and resolve it in accordance with the stated statute. Looking at the agenda for today, does anyone have any conflicts of interest they would need to raise or mention? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on. Excellent. The first thing, appearances. This agenda time is reserved to provide citizens an opportunity to appear before the Planning Commission about issues other than those that are appearing on the agenda this evening. Citizens may present their planning ideas, opinions, or concerns for the Commission consideration and discussion. Anyone wishing to speak should come to the podium, state their name, and address for the record. No one for that? All right. In that case, let's begin with our old business. All right, item 1, review and approval of April 10, 2025 minutes. They were fairly limited because we basically pushed this content to last month's content to this month. So I don't think there was much to approve or no significant issues to address. Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. All right. Everyone has a copy of those. Are there any corrections? We're all set. Okay. Seeing none, we will approve them as submitted. Excellent. Item 2, review of city council action since the last meeting.
And there were none because we had no items to present to them.
Okay, easy enough. All right, and then we're going to get to item 3, the topic for this evening. Consideration for an application submitted by Terramore Development, LLC, to rezone the property listed at 1807 South Sterling Street, 0 Sloan Avenue, and 0 Sterling Forest Drive. The property is currently zoned Medium Intensity District Corridor Overlay, and the application is to rezone to High Intensity District Corridor Overlay and MID to and Medium Intensity District to High Intensity District. Turn it over to you, Wendy, to walk us through all that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
For those in the audience on the screen, I am Wendy Smith. I'm the Director of Development and Design Services for the city. And we'll be presenting the application on behalf of staff tonight. So the application is for 5 parcels on, let me bring up a map here. Hang on, Chad, I think I need to grab one more map. If I can. Oh, it's here. Can you guys hear me? Do I need a microphone? Better? Okay, let me relocate. All right, how's that? Very good. Okay, thank you, guys. So the proposal is to rezone 5 parcels, and it is these 5 parcels. Apologies, there is a discrepancy. If I can get to, I can't get to the internet, sorry, so I can't get to the other map, but I was trying to show you the parcels outlined. It is the corner of, it's actually not the corner, sorry, of, but between Sloan Avenue and Gant Street on South Sterling Street. So it is this parcel out the back, this parcel, this little parcel in between that I thought I highlighted before. It's not letting me highlight. This parcel and this parcel up the front. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along through the back. Everybody clear on which parcels they are? We will use the land use map. So those 5 parcels. So not the corner of Sloan Avenue, not try to Gant Street over here, but in between. Okay. And I thought there was a aerial photo underneath, but again, technology issues, we will blame it on the massive storm outside. The parcels in question are all currently undeveloped, except a portion of this house may be on those parcels. It's a little unclear with our zoning boundaries here, or sorry, with the Burke County GIS boundaries there, but that would be determined at the time of development. So these parcels that go out through the back here. As Aaron said, the proposal is to rezone them from MID to HID with the corridor overlay. On this map, you can see that the corridor overlay runs along all of South Sterling Street. We turn that on. It's the dark orange hatched area. I'm going to turn that off because it makes it hard to see everything underneath, and there's no proposal to change the corridor overlay. The proposal is to keep that corridor overlay regardless of what the underlying zone is. So to be more consistent with everything, we're gonna just assume that stays the same. The surrounding areas in the pale green are all MID areas, which is the medium intensity district. That use is intended for a variety of medium to high density residential and low to medium intensity civic, institutional, office, service, and retail uses, designed to keep the impact on the adjacent residential areas at a minimum. So all of these adjacent residential areas, the idea of that zone is that they're developed or possibly looking at being developed with residential uses, and other uses should keep the impact on those types of uses to a minimum. The high-intensity district, which is further down South Sterling here, where you have the hospital and the retail, or not retail, sorry, more restaurant uses, the higher education center, the Momentum Tire use and its associated parking lot for motor vehicle services there. And it is established to accommodate high-density residential, wide variety of civic, instructional, retail, service, and office uses, and to ensure those uses don't have a harmful effect on adjacent neighborhoods or other commercial areas of the city. But there are a distinct difference the intention of the two different districts, instead of having one, is to have different intensity of uses and have different impacts on adjacent residential uses. The density standards and dimensional standards that you have listed in your report, the big difference is that if those properties were rezoned to HID, the potential intensity of residential uses would go from 10 dwelling units per acre to 20 dwelling units per acre, so a doubling of the overall density. And that there would be, the height difference could go from 35 to 65 feet. So, as I said, these properties are vacant. There is one house there. There are houses along Gant Street. There's an apartment complex along the back. There are houses across the street on, well, they face South Sterling, but they come off of Hudson and Moose Street, et cetera. And then further down South Sterling Street, you do have some commercial uses here across Sloan Avenue. And this little complex here is, if you're familiar with the Exhausted Rooster Antique Store is there. And then there is, I think, a beauty salon of some sort that is in that complex there. So it's the main differences in the different density and dimensional standards. There is a set of uses that would be permitted in HID but not MID. You have a list there. There's a list on the screen of the different uses that could be in that zone. Some of these uses we may not have anywhere in the city. Some of the, like a specific crematory, or would we expect a different hospital in the city? The idea is they could be there. Also, you can see whether or not these things are likely or not to be developed there. I'll just run through them for the record. Greenhouses, colleges, universities, hospitals, research facilities, crematories, hotels and motels, motion picture production. Not sure why that's in there, but it is. But the motor vehicle and boat services with or without outdoor storage, including gas stations and car washes, auction houses, your motor vehicle or boat sales or rental, which is the different category to the services. Retail uses over 3,000 square feet. So currently MID does allow retail uses, but they have to be under 3,000 square feet. And I'll come back to that part. Wholesale uses, inside and outside, nightclubs and bars, private clubs, which is sort of like a bar but has membership. We have a cigar bar in town, for example, of that. Private indoor recreation facilities, drive-in theater, again, not all uses necessarily likely, but possible. Data center, manufacturing, processing, and assembly, recycling center, taxi cab services, and warehouse. So again, all those uses are what someone could apply to be there. Whether or not it would fit or would be up to all the rest of the standards would be up to a zoning application at a later stage. The comprehensive plan map, land use map that we had up there. So you guys will be familiar. We just spent 2 years going through a comprehensive plan process, working closely with yourselves and the city council, working with the 30-member advisory committee to develop what this land use map might look like with, I think it was over 2,000 points of community interest that was inputted into that plan. This map was proposed there. We did not get any community comment on this site, including from the landowners who were on the advisory committee at that time. So it was envisioned that Sloan Avenue would be, which actually continues back down here onto Sterling Forest Drive, but it's a private street. Past that would be a dividing line of where we're going to have the heavy or heavier intensity uses and where it would go into that mixed density residential neighborhood type uses instead of the more heavily commercial uses. You might remember that we discussed at the time of the rezoning of the property across the street, that the street boundary may be a more appropriate property line for a zoning boundary than in the middle of a site. I think that that is probably applicable here as well. In my professional planning opinion, having this in the middle here is a spot rezoning because it is not connecting it to anything that has a similar zone on the other side. This is what it would look like if it was rezoned. You would have HID in the middle of all of this MID, the closest HID sort of diagonally over here across the street, and then further down adjacent to East Parker Road. And so you would be putting all of those available uses that we saw on that list there again, potentially in that neighborhood use. So the main differences in the HID and the MID categories, again, are the difference in that intensity of use for the surrounding neighborhood areas. I think I read all those. So the more than 3,000 square feet of retail, the things like the manufacturing or processing, your motor vehicle sales, motor vehicle and uses are probably a bit more common than some of those, maybe hotels and motels, than some of those things like motion picture production or a drive-in theater, right? We talked about 65 feet in height. So this, if you do choose to rezone this, it's not going to be consistent with the comprehensive plan that you just developed. Was adopted in September of last year, so is that seven? It was 7 months ago in April, 8 months ago. No, we've delayed it for that. We believe it would be a spot rezoning and that there are some of these potential uses that would be harmful to the adjacent surrounding residential uses in that neighborhood. That it's not aligned with the comprehensive plan. If you did choose to do that, you would need to make a specific statement that you were making a decision that was not in line with the comprehensive plan. All of the overlay zones, as we mentioned, would stay. We did receive one public comment on the application. I'd like to read that and enter it into the record, and I do have a copy if anybody wants it. I'm just going to read it because it's just 2 lines. Actually, 3. It says, it is from Lynn Gaudio, and it says, "Hello, please do not put a Dollar General store on South Sterling Street. There are enough of them in Morganton. Please put in retail or service that would add to the quality of downtown Morganton. Thank you for reading my note." So this is a point where I say in every meeting, we're not considering any particular use on this property. We're forbidden from considering that particular use because any of those things in that category, any of those things that we showed on that list are something that could be developed there. Properties and owners and businesses and things change over time. So while we are reading that note, and there may have been some things in the media, we are not considering any particular use for that property, same as we do in every meeting, but rather considering the range of uses that are potentially possible under the zoning and what could be developed there. Are there any questions about anything that I've said there? Before we move on?
I have one, of course.
Yes, go for it, Hank.
You got 5 parcels. I didn't hear any statement as to the total acreage. And before we get the answer on that, are those 5, if they were purchased by a single owner, able to be combined into one large lot?
They are certainly able to be combined into one large lot. And if a single development went, at any point, if a development crosses a boundary line, we either ask for the parcels to be recombined as part of the zoning permit and prior to them receiving a CO for the use, or alternatively, they can place an easement over the portions of the property that are required to be connected, again, prior to getting a certificate of occupancy for the use. So for example, if someone were to have a retail business on one site and want to put their parking on another site, they could leave them in 2 separate parcels, but they would have to encumber them so that they always went together so that you didn't accidentally sell one parcel and then not have the parking on those places. The, let me get that acreage for you. Yes. 2.38 acres.
Okay.
All totally together.
And under 2.38, we have, what, density from, what, 10?
10 dwelling units per acre, so
You could
10
go-
times that is 23. And 20 would be double that.
I got you. And then I follow up to these individual parcels, I'm assuming are not, except for the one that looks to be connected to Sloan Avenue, would be large enough to do much as far as a development individually?
That is entirely up to the developer and what they are proposing. We had a conversation today with someone that wanted to put a 700 square foot building on a site and use that for their development. We had another conversation today with someone that was putting a 65-foot tall building on a site, and that was also smaller than 2.3 acres.
What's driving my question is
So-
the property under the current zoning economically feasible to be developed to present an economic
I think there are uses that could be developed on that property.
viable use, yeah.
Yes, 2.3 acres, and, you know, a small retail store under 3,000 square feet is definitely going to be able to fit on several of those properties, as would a doctor's office or a house or the multifamily apartment complex. There'd be a range of uses that could be feasibly developed on there. As far as the economics of it and whether or not it's profitable, that's not something that we can consider from a planning perspective.
Understand.
Because it all depends on how much money you have. Always, as we said before, Elon Musk could come in here and develop
But I
something.
think that enters into an equation for usages to make a determination, so I'll shut up.
That would probably be better directed towards a real estate assessment, which can't really be
Beyond,
part
yeah.
of this
Yeah, I understand.
consideration.
Thank you.
Any,
So I know we
unclarity
can't talk
about
about specifics, but have the owners suggested what their plan is?
there are representatives from them here, so I will let them speak about what they are proposing to do or not, or how this meets the standards, and that might be a question that you can ask of them. But I just wanted to know if there were anything you need to clarify from what I presented here.
Could you
No.
maybe just speak to what the retail use is currently allowed as it is zoned?
So currently, retail uses up to 3,000 square feet are allowed.
Yep.
And then you could, I think, no outdoor use, sorry, I'm afraid you're on
Okay,
my
fully
side. So
enclosed.
They need to be full, inside a fully enclosed building. So this would be similar to the application that you guys talked about 2 months ago now, where they did want to do, they had a small building and wanted to do outdoor retail, and that was the purpose in rezoning it. Again, it was supposed to be part of the consideration, but that was specifically why they wanted to rezone the site. So currently less than 3,000 square feet inside fully enclosed building. If you rezone it, it can be 3,000 square feet or greater, inside or outside.
And that is independent of how much acres there are.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, you could do on 2.3 acres. I'm not going to figure up all the parking, but you could do several 4,000 square foot retail spaces on there, for example, if they fit and went down the hill back there.
4,000? 3,000 or so?
If you rezoned it,
I see. Yep.
sorry. At the moment, you could do a 3,000 square foot, well, a 2,999 apparently square foot building.
Got it.
And the
Per
associated-
acre.
No.
No, okay.
At all.
Per parcel.
So the building would be that, then they need their associated parking, then they need their associated landscaping.
Okay.
And however that configuration worked out to what the total site would be. I can try to get you quickly a comparison building, maybe further down the street here. Let's see if I can pick something to figure out what 3,000, no, because that is the wrong map.
Yeah, I was just trying to get a little clarity
No,
on
it's a
like
great
what's
question.
possible as it currently stands versus what additional.
So the, I didn't have to go to the screen, you can go to us, but I just picked the Captain D's building down the street, and it is 2,277 square feet. So just under 3,000 square feet there. If that gives you any idea of how big that
What kind of
is.
acreage is it sitting on?
It sits on, now, that was developed pre our standards, so I don't know if it has enough parking, and definitely doesn't have the landscaping that we have at the moment, but 0.68 acres. We'll give you a better example. The Pizza Hut was developed according to the current standards. It is 0.39 acres, and the building size is 1,900 square feet. So that may be a
So
better.
on 2.38 acres, you could have just one under 3,000 square foot building
No.
No, you
You
could
could have
have-
as many as you could fit.
fit,
And
and
meet
in
the-
addition to the parking and the landscaping and the.
Yes,
okay.
so if we took So if we say 0.39,
Yeah,
and a 1,900 square foot building works for the Pizza Hut, under today's standards, you could, I'm just going to make a guess as to the extrapolation, but say on a 0.5 acre parcel, you could probably get a 3,000 square foot building and all the parking and landscaping that we need.
Oh, sure.
So on this parcel, you could get, if you just went on straight acreage, probably 4 of those. However, we do have to take into account how it faces the street
Right.
and the contours along the backside of the property as well in there. But that's just a rough example of one that does meet our standards.
I
So,
understand.
all good questions.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
not yet.
Okay, in that case, I am going to open the public hearing portion. So if anyone present who's representing the applicant would like to please come to the podium and state your name and address, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Amanda Hodiern. My offices are at 804 Green Valley Road, Suite 200 in Greensboro. And I'm here tonight, I'm a land use attorney on behalf of the current property owners of record and the applicant, would-be developer who has the property under contract for purchase. And I'm going to ask, thank you. So I've got some slides here. Hopefully you can see those in front of you just to lift up and emphasize some points and better articulate some of the aspects of our request. Thank you, Ms. Smith, for that overview. A lot of the stuff I want to talk about, you've heard previewed to you, so this will be a nice fluid conversation. So this is our subject property. This is just an aerial photograph from Google Maps. Of course, I know you all are well familiar with this. So not only is this orienting us and anyone watching exactly where the subject property is, but it's also important to actually think about, sometimes when we drive by something day in and day out, we don't necessarily remember or think about how that looks from a zoomed out perspective in the context of your entire city and its patterns. So if we start at the bottom, let's see, right-hand corner of your screen, that of course is the interchange, exit 105 off of the interstate. As I drove here from Greensboro, that's what my maps told me to take to get here tonight. So I'm going to submit to you, I think you'll agree, that is your main gateway corridor from the interstate into downtown Morganton. And other things, the hospital system right there at the corner, the UNC Blue Ridge Hospital System, Broughton Hospital, as you come further in. So this is a major corridor. We know it's a major thoroughfare and arterial corridor. Those are terms we see both in your zoning ordinance and in your Imagine Morganton 2040 language. We know that from the fact that it has a corridor overlay protection layer on it. So these are not opinions of mine. This is common information that we know and we see the city has prioritized in its planning and its strategies. So as we look at that corridor in its current state, I mentioned if we just start at the interchange, get off the exit, and like we're driving into downtown, we pass the major UNC healthcare system. We pass all kinds of interstate exit uses that you would imagine you would see: gas stations, hotels, Cracker Barrels, Starbucks, fast food restaurants, all the classic interstate, I'm traveling, I need to do things off the interstate, or I need to stop, types of uses that you would expect. And that comports with that HID zoning that exists there. Skip ahead a little as you get into if we go back, please. Thank you. If you skip ahead in your mind, going down that corridor into downtown, you of course pass the uses start to transition. The commercial uses that face that major corridor become less destination-oriented or less purposeful in terms of it really needs to be at the interstate. It's also not the type of thing you would see downtown, but nonetheless, it's tried and true commercial goods and services that serve the community. Restaurants that perhaps aren't as conducive to highway travel, but we need them and we love them in all of our communities. More uses, hair salons, I think was mentioned, an antique shop. So commercial uses that want to be on that main drag, they want to capture that passerby traffic, they want to be where people already are, but they don't need to be by the interstate and they don't need or want to be downtown. So that is exactly the type of commercial use that you see along these corridors. Again, we know it's a major corridor. It has the protections to make sure that those types of uses can front on this major thoroughfare without being offensive to your aesthetic, to this gateway that's important to your city, and to all the other less intense and largely residential uses that start to happen behind, off the main first level of your commercial corridor. So I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for humoring me to walk through what that corridor really looks like and what that land use pattern is. If we could now go to the next slide, please. This is the subject property, along with the feasibility sketch that I thought would be informative, as you've heard from Ms. Smith, your director, and I will reiterate, this is not a request specific to this sketch. This is just for feasibility analysis, which is what we do at this point in the process to ensure viability and the viability and the merit of pursuing a rezoning. So I want to lift up a major point here. The 2.38 acres that you've heard discussed, it's actually a subdivision of all those 5 parcels that you saw. So the total acreage of all of those 5 parcels that is over twice as much, perhaps 3 times as much as the 2.38 acres. So this is a carve-out of that entire parcelage and subject property assemblage that you were shown and talked about earlier. Notably, the carve-out that we're petitioning for does not touch Sloan Street. It does not continue to either side, to Gant or to Sloan. It comes up the middle there, as you can see here. Doesn't continue to the back of that large back parcel. And it arguably, it kind of gets over to Gant Street, but it's mainly just along the frontage there. We're not trying to introduce a large frontage or an access point onto Gant Street from what you see here. You'll also note, and I looked at the contours on the Burke County GIS, the topography here is important. It's significant. There's actually a little knoll, if you will, that sits right at the Gant Street, South Sterling Street intersection. You start out at about 1180 elevation there. By the time you get to Sloan Street, you're down at closer to 1120. In fact, if you have noticed driving by there recently, there's a huge retaining wall that sits at that parcel on the corner that's not part of this request, just to facilitate the house structure that you see there now. So it's a significant drop-off. The sort of the flattest, most manageable part of the site is right here in the middle, as you see here. The topography, again, gets quite steep at the back of the site as it falls off to that stream draw that exists to the rear. So that informed the placement and the decision of my client and the developer about what part of those 5 parcels was most suitable for what they try to do. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. So that's how we arrived at this particular arrangement of the acreage and the 2.38 acres that you've heard about. So if we could go to the next slide, please. This is your zoning pattern. We've touched on this a little bit. Again, same orientation coming from the interstate at the bottom right-hand corner into downtown at the top left-hand corner. The subject parcels in whole are outlined in purple here at the middle of your screen. So again, remember the request is just a middle carve-out of that, but the subject properties are highlighted in purple.
Can I just interrupt for a
Yes,
second
ma'am.
and ask a clarifying question myself?
Yes.
The application that I remember is the entirety of all of the parcels. There was not a specific page that said it is only a carve-out of those parcels. So is there a request to change the application to just a carve-out of those parcels?
So the application that I'm familiar with, and I did not prepare it, I'll disclaim, but it says 2.38 acres, and then it says subdivision of assemblage, and then there's an attachment that is exactly what I just shared with you, that was
So-
submitted with it.
And unfortunately, I'm not able to connect to that system at the moment, but the application that we received was the entirety of all of those parcels. So it
can-
had
I
all
can
5
call-
of
I
those
can
parcels
so-
listed, so we do need to be clear on what we are
I'm gonna-
proposing to rezone or not.
I'm going to introduce Mr. Daniel Almazar with Terramore Development, who prepared the application.
Thank you.
Good evening. Sorry, I'm still a little wet from earlier. So just to clarify, the original application that was submitted had our 2.38 acres. We showed that subdivision. And I think that there was a question about I think there was a parcel number that was missing, and let me see, I'm trying to remember the other question that staff had provided, where that they just wanted a correction on it. And when we did the correction, the only thing that I can think of is that I don't remember
You
that.
listed all 5 parcels as asking to be rezoned.
We had the list, we had to, because your application asked which parcels are affected, and so we had no choice, we had to include those parcel numbers, and perhaps what we didn't do was specify that of these, meaning typed out, of these, we want to subdivide and do 2.38 acres. But we did submit a site plan showing that carve-out. And so maybe,
It does say subdivision
yeah,
on
it shows subdivision, but obviously it wasn't clear, and we do need to clarify that. Absolutely, we do need to clarify that.
So the application that we have put before the board last month and this month
Yeah.
is, Chad, can you go to the map on my screen? And what we received, you guys, is the entirety of all of these parcels being outlined here to be rezoned.
Okay. That's,
That acreage adds up to.
And there was nothing, while there was an example of what may go on there, there was no specific request that that was only what was asked to be rezoned as part of the application. So you're saying a smaller portion
Yes.
of this
yes,
is actually what you want to rezone within these boundaries?
that's correct.
And that, if I may, that was the reason for the submittal of that feasibility map, was to show those boundaries, because your application requires that if it's a partial, you had to show a map of that boundary. So that it says grading plan in the title block, but it has meets and it has calls on it, so as to be able to discern the
Yeah.
requested area.
What would typically happen in that case is you would say on your application, a portion of each of these parcels was being asked to be rezoned, and
Okay.
show that specific map as far as what's being presented. So just so you know, the staff report
I understand.
and what we have just presented may need to be tweaked in response to what you have just told us in the meeting today.
And-
So I just
I'm
want
sorry
to
for that
clarify that.
confusion.
Happy for, if you guys are happy to continue with what they're saying, I think that's probably fine, but I do not have a map then to present to them on this type of map. Chad, if you can go to the screen, to show,
I just have this,
which-
that it's clear that it's.
to overlay that, to show the limits of what you want to rezone
So for clarity, these 5 parcels
are going to be
are
larger.
greater than the 2.38 acres.
That is-
That entire acreage adds up to closer to, I believe, 13 acres, as I recall, when I did the math today.
And actually, I suppose if that's the case, well, okay, because of the parcels that you had referenced did not include the one that was adjacent to the other. Had we looked at all of it, then we wouldn't have had also because you had mentioned that we were sort of in a spot zoning possibility because we weren't adjacent, but it would have included all of those, and those would have been adjacent. But,
Well, they're not adjacent to HID, so you're actually creating
I'll
a,
speak
I
to
understand.
that,
yeah, we'll get to that,
all right.
but yeah.
Thank you.
so,
Thank you for that clarification and for allowing us
Just
to
as I heard
proceed.
you saying that, I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure, and we can talk as a board what
Thank
that
you.
might be, but thank you.
Thank you. So if we could jump back into the slides, please. Thank you. So again, looking back at the zoning pattern, we're zoomed out here so that we can see the quilt, if you will, the zoning pattern of your current zoning districts in place. You've got the HID down by the interstate interchange, as we would expect, because again, those are those destination, very purposeful type of commercial uses that you would expect people to want to be able to access while traveling. And then, of course, you've got your institutional zoning there in the blue, the SID, Special Intensity District, that encompasses the Broughton Hospital campus. You've got some HID to the south of that, coming down at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. You've got LID to the north that encompass some of your known industrial uses. And then you've got a swath, if you will, of MID here in the middle, with several incursions of HID as we come up to the corridor, which reflects what I talked about earlier, that land use pattern of lots of commercial uses, predominant, I would submit to you, predominant commercial uses right there along the corridor, which is a classic land use pattern, right? A classic pattern that where you would have your commercial uses, your visibility uses right up there on the corridor, and then transition back to residential as you come off of the major thoroughfare. As we see new development happen more and more coming forward, we don't often see brand-new residential, certainly not single-family, along a major thoroughfare. We often see that, perhaps you'll have an access way and then it'll open up into a single-family neighborhood. But typically, just speaking of new development, if you were going to see residential development along a major thoroughfare like this, it would probably be at a multifamily context, which is in keeping with, we'll get to this, what your land use plan says. Again, you also have your corridor overlay, which is, as Ms. Smith noted, is not in play here. There's no request to change that or curtail it or anything, so that remains consistent. So if we could go to the next slide, please. The nature of the request, now that we've oriented ourselves and looked at the map, it is 2.38 acres, as we've discussed, and Ms. Smith helped us clarify. Again, that is just a portion of that 5-acre or 5-parcel assemblage that you saw. Currently zoned MID, medium intensity district with the corridor overlay. We're proposing or requesting HID, high intensity district, with that corridor overlay to remain. The subject property frontage is directly on South Sterling Road. It's accessed from South Sterling Road. And again, that was by design to make sure that we didn't have any access or spillover frontage onto the side streets. And the result I'm going to submit to you is a narrow delta of change between these two districts. And I'm going to elaborate as to how why I will suggest that. As Ms. Smith read to you, you have a medium intensity district and a high intensity district whose intents, I will submit to you, are not entirely dissimilar, in fact, quite similar. You see that both look for a variety of uses, ranging from residential, civic, institutional, office, and retail. Same exact use range described in HID. You see a goal to not overly or unduly impact neighboring uses. Medium intensity, it's described as designed to keep impact on adjacent residential areas at a minimum. And high intensity, you see that same goal described as do not have a harmful effect on adjacent neighborhoods or other areas. And the other big change that you see is that HID introduces this idea that it's appropriate along major arterials within the city. As we've identified, South Sterling is in fact one of those major arterials. So I will suggest to you that I think that's why it makes sense and why a developer, when looking at your plans and wanting to be in keeping with those and wanting to bring something forward that wasn't a total departure from y'all's goals and objectives, we felt like this could be properly done in order to meet the intent that you've laid out here in your zoning districts. As Ms. Smith read to you, there's a use difference, right? You've got your permitted use table. And I counted it up. There's 34 additional uses that exist that are permitted in HID, not permitted in MID. Ms. Smith read those to you. Of those 34, 10 are prohibited by the corridor overlay. So now we're down to 24. 10 can't happen here because of that corridor overlay. Of that remaining 24, 2 of them cannot meet your additional use standards under Article 3.2. They can't meet those additional standards. So those are now eliminated. Another 3 of those remaining 24 uses would be heavily curtailed or limited by those additional use standards. Notably, outdoor storage is one of them. And that is why my client was very careful in carving out a piece of property that was both functional and feasible. That's why we do those feasibility layouts, but that doesn't create so much opportunity that, as I think Mr. Dickens was getting at, that some of these other uses on that list could become probable or doable here. We wanted to keep it narrow. We wanted to keep this a narrow delta of change so that the actual functionality and feasibility of what could go here was very small. And that's another reason why we wanted to limit it in scope. Again, this is maintaining consistency. This is another way we keep it small. We're maintaining consistency with that corridor overlay district. That's a big key tool in your development ordinance. It has already said that it is important to the city of Morganton that this corridor have certain higher standards for aesthetics. And the way that's achieved is through development standards with landscaping, with building design, parking placement, sidewalk provision, the requirement for curb and gutters and paving, all of these things that you as a city expect to be presented along one of your major corridors so that you don't end up with a development style or quality level that you don't feel like is in keeping with what you want everyone to see as they travel your main corridors. So that's a key feature that acts as a main curtailment to some of these uses that are on that list. Because remember, zoning is just asking permission to try. So you set the zoning district, and then you have to go try to meet all those standards. So those act together, and the corridor overlay does a great job of empowering that aspect of your ordinance. So if we go back to the slide one more time, please. And again, I've mentioned this, the minimal scope of just 2.38 acres, again, was intentional on our part to ensure that the scope and size of this request isn't bigger than it needs to be. It doesn't create too much opportunity to get some things in here that aren't appropriate. So by scope, by your own development ordinance that's already in place in its strong provisions, and by the delta of uses, I would suggest to you that this is a narrow delta of change that we're asking you to consider tonight. So you also know that you need to look at your comprehensive planning guidance. That's part of your analysis here tonight. Ms. Smith has talked about that. And of course, we also noticed that you guys have a great new comprehensive plan just adopted less than a year ago in September. So we utilize that. That's always a first part of our analysis as well. Again, we want to be in keeping with the community. We're not trying to go against the grain. So when I look at comprehensive planning guidance, and whether or not a request is consistent with that, I think we have to start zoomed out. We don't just go straight to the future land use plan and see if it matches the designation, because I would ask you to consider the fact that a future land use plan is merely one manifestation of your goals and objectives in a comprehensive plan. If you think about it, I'm sure a lot of you worked, if not all of you, worked hard on that plan. It talks about things like recreational goals, transportation goals, walkability and mobility goals, housing stock goals, economic development. It addresses a multitude of aspects of the city and not just future land use. And then it gets into detail as to how certain types of policies can help you achieve those goals and objectives. Future land use is certainly a big one and an important one, but it's just one. So I always like to start broader than that, and I look at the plan as a whole, and I say, when I look at this plan, especially a brand new one like this, and I know it's fresh, and I know it's a good reflectment of what the community has said, I think, what is jumping out at me here? What do I get from this that the community wants and that their objectives are? So what jumped out at me here is growth, that the city of Morganton did embrace the idea that growth is coming, and you guys want to be ready for it, that you want to make sure that you grow in a thoughtful way, an intentional way. You have things here, a planning principle. The first one is growth. Path to Future Land Use Math talks about growth corridors. How should we grow? Where should we grow? In what form? Your conceptual growth strategy looks at ways to capitalize upon what you already have going for you and where people already are using your community in ways that make sense. So that tells me that Morganton is very mindful and aware of the fact that you guys are a thriving community. People want to be here. People who are here like being here, and you're going to continue to thrive and have more folks coming. So if we look at the next slide, the second big thing that jumped out at me was the emphasis on housing in your plan. And the reason I came to that conclusion was a variety of ways, but I just want to harp on two here. Your current land use, that's the slide on your left as you look at your screen. Your current land use in residential designations, you see it there, multifamily is just over 6%, single family just over 26% of your entire land use area. And then you've got a little bit in manufactured housing. Contrast that with your future land use goals. In your future land use table, you're looking at between your mixed density residential, your smaller lot residential, and your larger lot residential, you're looking to get about 80% of your land use in housing. So that tells me that Morganton is very keen and interested in growing its housing base. You've got, as you all know, you worked on this document. You've also got a lot of goals and objectives and strategies about creating a variety within that housing stock, making sure that it is meeting everyone at their needs, providing attractive housing, safe housing, and different levels of housing in different places, and placing that housing where it makes sense. So I look at those objectives and I think, okay, how can our request feed into that? So that's something I want to think about as we talk about the future land use plan. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Of course, you know this one. This is your future land use plan map. We've got a red arrow drawn and a blue circle there showing where our subject property is within your big map. So what you'll notice here is that it is in that mixed density residential categorization, as you've heard from Ms. Smith, and it is right between two red areas. That red area is your mixed use. It's right on that corridor, as we've talked about, and that orange swath, which is the mixed density residential, it's a wide area, not only here in this location, but in other parts of the city as well. And what I want to submit to you is that the goals and objectives that the land use plan is trying to achieve in each of those districts, I think you could make an argument that either one could help this corridor. So that's what I want to look at. I think that we're really not that dissimilar to what this plan and strategy is looking to do. So we know we've got mixed use down at the interchange. We know we've got mixed use down Enola, there in front of the Broughton campus, and then of course on into downtown. So my question is, why not here? You know, I've looked at the corridor overlay, I've looked at the major arterials being a guiding principle of your high-intensity district. So I'm thinking, okay, why would we not do that along this corridor? So I dig in to look at that. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here's the mixed-use district. Your intent, your guiding bullet points here are to focus on locations well-positioned for growth and redevelopment with a focus on a mix of commercial, office, and retail with multifamily. I would suggest to you that this site meets that. We're along the major corridor. It's well-positioned for growth because we know we've got folks traveling from the interstate into town. We've got folks traveling between major employment centers, the hospital, if they have to travel for work. We've got folks coming to these variety of commercial uses already. We know this is a major corridor. We know people are already here. We know it's positioned for growth. So I'm going to put a check by that one. Promote coordinated master plan development of large sites to encourage a mix of uses in a horizontal or vertical format. A mix of uses in horizontal format. What does that mean? It means that we need to support and underpin all that residential growth that you're trying to get with supportive goods and services that create a nice horizontal mixed use for those folks, so that if you're at home or you don't want to have a whole Saturday outing to a big destination shopping center, you just want to take care of some basics, get your cell phone fixed, pick up some sundries that you missed out on, have your hair fixed, those types of goods and services that are just part of all of our daily lives. This concept tells me that we're supposed to put those in these mixed-use districts. Enhance the look and functionality of commercial corridors and existing centers to support broader economic, entertainment, cultural activities for the region. This to me is your corridor overlay. That's how you're doing that. You're enhancing all of your commercial corridors by ensuring that they all have to meet that high level of development standards. Again, that's in place here. We're not asking to change it. Create a design and scale to encourage active living with a connected network of walkable streets and paths. So again, how do we do that? We have to place goods and services where people can get to them. Where if we're capturing a lot of folks living in an area, if we're capturing a lot of folks already traveling between major destinations within an area, let's put other things there that we know we all have to do, we all have to need, because that limits congestion, it limits sprawl, and it prevents unnecessary trips out to other locations to do those things, capture people where they already are. And then the walkable part, I mentioned that was a big part of your plan, walkable and connectivity. I saw that Enola Drive or Enola Road corridor was designated as one of your walkable connectivity corridors. So if that happens, if that's the goal, and people walk up Enola to South Sterling, then what? Then where do they go? I think it makes sense to have places along South Sterling for them to go to. That's how walkability makes sense. You have to have somewhere to walk to. So we want to put places in those in those locations that you are already making a concerted effort for people to be able to move multimodally. Appropriate land uses, here in the middle, we do see commercial at wide ranges, multifamily like I talked about, all of that are on the high scale here. So if we look now, and remember mixed use is just on either side of this site. So if we look now at the next slide, please. This is mixed density residential neighborhood, that gold color, and that is what the designation is here on our subject property. So your goals here were to support a variety of housing, particularly multifamily, like we've talked about, smaller lot single, encourage increases in density within existing neighborhoods. That doesn't apply here. This is not an existing neighborhood. Consider land development code changes to reduce lot sizes and setbacks. That's again, looking at how to increase the housing format and density in these areas. And then this last one, allow neighborhood-scale commercial uses that may serve the wider community. That's what I've been talking about. That's where you see the overlap here, and that's why I'm suggesting to you that it is not a far leap or asking you to deviate from your hard worked-upon goals and objectives that you decided on last year to go ahead and slide the corridor here where we know people are moving, where we know you've got the corridor overlay standards, we know you're moving people in a multimodal fashion. It makes sense to embrace this concept of serving those folks, serving that population with supportive goods and services in a way that makes sense. You see retail and residential there, office, institutional, all those commercial uses are on your appropriate use scale. They're just a little lower down. So again, now think back to that delta of change I talked about. So if we decided that they are appropriate, the question becomes about scope and scale. At what scope and scale do they make sense to fit into these goals and objectives that's really a spectrum between mixed use and medium density residential? It's really a sliding scale spectrum that zoning changes and development requests, that's what comes in to actually apply a comprehensive plan's goals and objectives. That's what's showing you its workability. And you may remember the last part of your comprehensive plan, I didn't copy it here, but it talks about how do we use this plan? How do decision makers use it? How does staff use it? How does the business community use it? How do residents use it? And what jumped out at me on those pages of your adopted plan was that this is a guidance tool. It's to aid us. It's to understand the bigger picture of how you want to grow and do other things, but it is not a mandate. It's to allow us to apply and be agile and nimble to use this to help us get to our micro goals. So I submit to you that that is exactly what this request does. It takes into account, it coagulates all of those planning principles, all of that guidance, and makes sense of it and applies it. If you remember the feasibility sketch we showed you, if we want to go back to that, please, actually. I just want to show this on a micro level. This is just a very cookie cutter, generic footprint of what we call a retail spec building. So when we lay this out here, this is, it's about 12 to 13,000 square feet, I believe. It's got your required parking. It's got, you see the topography there in order to make level parking lots, to make a level floor elevation, to be able to serve the necessary stormwater components, et cetera, meet all of those development standards that I've talked about and Ms. Smith talked about. So by the time you do all of that, and by the time you try to infuse the area with those uplifting residential support uses like I'm talking about, sundry purchases that we all need, milk on the way home from work, lunch bags, laundry detergent, what have you. The type of stuff that you want in your community, you don't want to have to drive far for. A cell phone store, a hair salon, a nail salon. You all can think of these things. They are prevalent and ubiquitous in our communities because they're not destination oriented. They're just support services. They're part of our daily lives that we all use. So we wanted to lay out a site that could capture that. My client, Terramore Development, that's what they do. They build retail spaces to then lease to future users. So there's no end user tied to this. We don't have anybody waiting in the wings ready to go. We're trying to set the table, create the landscape that shows that this is a viable site for those types of users. And what I want you to notice about that is that at 3,000 square feet, it is difficult to get that to pencil out and make sense and be able to get those types of users in a way that the site development can make sense. So in other words, we need enough of a critical mass to create something that, we can bring, if you imagine a multi-bay retail space with a few types of users in it, that's going to be bigger than 3,000 square feet. If you think of a little, sundries type of store, again, not Costco, not Belk, not those types of things, just basic stuff, that's bigger than 3,000 square feet. So that's what we were trying to capture here, and that is why my particular client applied for this rezoning, because we need more than 3,000 square feet. I know you have to consider the whole range of uses. That's why I wanted to talk about how that exists. That's why I wanted to emphasize that this is just 2.38 acres, so that you can have some comfort, hopefully, in understanding that a lot of those uses won't fit here, can't viably go here. So this is a very narrowly tailored, intentionally narrowly tailored request to try and capture that goal and objective of your comprehensive planning that says, hey, put goods and services where people live. Put them on the major corridors where people are already traveling, and then protect them. Make sure they look good by using our corridor overlay requirements. I think I had one more slide. So, yep, in summary, you all know this. When you're asked to consider a rezoning, your prong from our 160D state requirements, you're supposed to ask, is it reasonable and in the public interest, and is it consistent with the comprehensive plan guidance? So that's what I've been up here talking about, and I just want to put things in those buckets as I wrap up here. As we look at reasonableness and in the public interest, I talked about the existing land use pattern. We talked about the fact that this is on a major corridor. You've got commercial uses fronting along that corridor all the way from the interchange into downtown. So this very much is in keeping with your existing land use pattern, and it's not only for the city of Morganton, but everywhere. That is a tried and true planning practice to have your commercial uses on the corridor, and then it transitions back to residential off the corridor. Your existing zoning pattern we looked at. We saw that we've got HID, we've got SID, we've got LID as we get from the interchange to downtown. So you have a quilt, a patchwork of zoning here that very much supports that land use pattern, and it very much supports the idea of corridor arterials, major travel thoroughfares being an important part of your pattern. Scope and scale. That's how another great way to measure reasonableness. We didn't want to overreach here. We didn't want to ask for too much, too big of an area that could invite all kinds of higher intensity, broader scale uses that could start to overbear what's appropriate here, i.e. overbear just that corridor frontage. We didn't want to do that. So we've narrowly scaled this back. Compatibility factors. That's looking at these development standards that your ordinance already has in place. You've got a very strong development ordinance. It requires high landscaping. It requires really high building design. Your corridor for commercial buildings, non-residential, requires certain roof types, vertical articulation, horizontal articulation, fenestration, building materials. You're not getting any plain Jane, corrugated cardboard type of buildings on this corridor, and that's good. That's why people want to be here, and that's why you've got this thriving corridor. So that also helps keep things reasonable and in the public interest. Not only is it nice to look at, but it mitigates impact. Next, we look at consistency with the comprehensive plan. I'm going to submit to you that it is consistent. And if we do need to slide it over into that mixed-use designation, again, I think that is a sliding fluid scale that has a lot of overlap, and that if appropriately scoped and scaled, this can meet that. It furthers the goals for your growth implicated by your corridor and node type of strategies and about coming to the people. Your plan was all about providing the people with ways to get around, ways to live, and ways to get their needs met in a way that makes sense. Supporting the strong objective to increase and improve housing. This does that because, again, if you're going to have housing, if people are going to want to live here, that comes with the ability to live in a community that has stuff that you need to do and you need to access. People like convenience. And it meets the key attributes of your land use plan designations. We talked about that. Those were those key bullet points of each of the factors that I read to you. And I think we are meeting those and we are furthering those goals. And this type of request allows you to do exactly what the plan asks of you, which is to be nimble and agile as you apply these objectives to certain development decisions. So with that, I will happily answer any questions. We have our civil engineer here, Mr. Derek Goddard. Again, just for feasibility types of questions, Mr. Dickens asked some of these earlier, in terms of when you actually apply all the development standards to these 2.38 acres, how does that really start to eat in on the site and limit options? He's looked at all of that, what it takes to develop something like this. Oh, and I do want to address, because it was asserted by Ms. Smith, this certainly does not meet the elements of spot zoning. That's a tested elemental test under the North Carolina case law, and it looks at much different factors than simply, is this a disparate district from the districts around it? It looks at exactly what I've talked about: compatibility, reasonableness, and consistency with goals and objectives for growth in the community. So I will respectfully put that information out there for your consideration as well, since it's been introduced. We're here for any questions. Thank you.
Can I just start by saying, I've attempted while you're speaking to create a map that may be what you're asking for. Chad, can you put my screen up? Is that roughly?
That's impressive.
The area that you're looking at? So only the area within the red box. So not this far over to Sloan Street, but still over to the Gant Street and surrounding those houses that are there. I should have put it on
I
an
think that's
aerial.
pretty- I
I
think
should have put
that's
it on an
pretty
aerial
close.
instead of behind this, so you could see what was behind it. So almost to the boundary. I think it actually goes a bit further back towards that. So almost toward that boundary. So leaving these other shapes in there, but this portion in the middle of that block. And I suppose you should point out that the Gant Street does not actually connect to South Sterling here because
right.
of the topography. The road reserves that, but the road itself, if we look back in there, so you're roughly going up to here and around. That
And-
house is not there.
That's right.
And
And
across, so.
when you
Just
talk,
as an example, if that is helpful for the considerations.
So Wendy, looks like 60% or more is already in HID.
No, this was the map that we were showing that's in your report, showing what it would look like
It's in the- it's
surrounded
in the
by.
corner overlay.
Right.
None of it is an HID, correct?
None of it's
Oh,
in HID at the
okay,
moment. This
okay.
is the corridor overlay, and the dark orange there was meant to represent what it would look like
Okay.
if it was rezoned.
Oh, I see.
That's in your packet.
Okay.
Again, I just picked a map. Maybe I should put this on a different picture, but it was just,
thank you for doing that.
Could I interject?
Yes.
for a second, just consideration?
Didn't you introduce yourself?
Yeah,
a
I'm
minute?
Keith Rigsby, attorney for the city of Morganton.
To the microphone so that
Okay.
we're
Very close to it. So, I'm not interjecting an opinion here, I'm just offering some advice for your consideration, whether or not, as the application exists right now, whether or not what's been requested here at the hearing constitutes a substantial change in what's been petitioned for, or if it's something more modest or minor. And in considering whether it's substantial or modest, you would look at, is the area changed? Is it a different area than what was requested? Is more area being requested for rezoning? Those sorts of things. So again, I'm not offering any opinion, just giving you something to think about. And the second thing is whether or not the petition as it exists is specific enough for you to decide whether or not you know what's being rezoned. Is it exact enough for you to make a determination about what are we rezoning? So those are just some things
Can I
to
ask
think about.
a legal point of question to
Yes.
you as well there? What was advertised to the public when people phoned to ask what was advertised? The neighbors that got their letters, they got the entire sites, all 5 sites.
Right.
So
that's what-
I don't know if there is what the legal
Right.
ramifications
Same-
are of that
same
not
thing.
being what has been advertised to those individuals and whether or not they have an opportunity to comment on it.
Yeah, same thing. If you consider it to be a substantial change, then I would submit you need to renotice the hearing. If you consider it not to be a substantial change, then you would not.
Well, if I do the math right, If we're saying 2.3 acres versus 13.
I calculate, it's 6.08 acres. Is that
6,
Go.
if you're.
for all the parcels?
Here,
About
we
6
can add that
acres?
up.
5 to 6.
Somebody got a calculator? Let's do this together.
She disagrees.
3.46 plus
So the HID does it run along, all the
0.37
way up?
plus
Stops.
0.93 plus 1 plus
Can't you go to the Board of Adjustment?
0.32 is, as Eric said, 6.08. So just for the record, we've gone from 6.08 acres that was publicly advertised as being rezoned, and only 2.38 acres is now being asked to be rezoned.
And what is the 2.38 acres? Is that
That's
the
what-
parking lot plus the store plus other things, or is that just the store building? Those are things you'll need to think about and ask about, probably.
So we're saying it's less than half of what was advertised.
In the different configuration of what was advertised there, yes.
I think we did.
Wendy, regardless of whether it's the whole parcels or a smaller portion of, my personal feeling is, and I would disagree with the attorney, that this is spot zoning. And regardless of whether you're spot zoning all those parcels in their entirety or only the portion that's carved out, it's spot zoning. And I could not move forward with that.
Can I ask, what are the implications of having a parcel that's zoned in 2 different designations? How does that usually work or not work?
It can work in there. You just need to know exactly where that boundary is for when you're making decisions on what can go in a parcel or not. So for example, if somebody wanted to develop a store larger than 3,000 square feet, it couldn't go over that boundary into the MID portion, nor could any of the associated uses, like Hank was asking about earlier, the parking for that use or the landscaping for that use or any of those pieces would need to be contained within that parcel.
Is that very common? Do we have many parcels that are
It's very
falling under the border?
uncommon.
Okay.
I won't say that there are none, but it's not common. You do try not to do so.
But it's not, it's
Yeah.
possible.
Yes,
Sure.
it is possible.
You're welcome
Definitely.
to continue, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to provide a little more clarity. So the request right now would result in a partial zoning, as Ms. Smith described. It would be based on a specific meets and bounds shape file that gets created. However, again, zoning is just the first step, so should this be approved and go forward, a subdivision plat would be recorded to create a lot line to fix that.
Would it be the intent to recombine the other parcels because several of them would then not meet minimum lot size
Ma'am. Yeah,
or
right.
the other size?
That's right.
I might just clarify, because she mentioned a list of uses, that the list of uses that we showed you did have those uses removed that were not allowed in the corridor, and that didn't meet those other standards. And I think it's actually Article 3.4 of the zoning ordinance, not 3.2 that was on the slides, and you're looking for that in your materials as you go. So,
I think I might have missed it when you were highlighting the feasibility study. Could you say that the just thing that you guys had shown, what was the square footage of that
I
spec
think she
building?
said 13,000?
Sorry.
For the record, 10,640 square feet, which again, we just asked Derek to grab something from his CAD library.
Gotcha.
And show
And
us
then-
what could work.
Yeah, and then that was, the parking you have shown here is sort of corresponding with that level of, just to make sure I'm comprehending it correctly.
I'm going to defer to the design expert.
Sure.
here.
Yeah, I'll be glad to address that. So basically, how we back, yeah, my name is Derek Goddard with Breck in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. So thank you.
Thank you.
What we basically do in these feasibility studies is we let the land drive the size of the building. So the topography here certainly is challenging. In fact, I would submit to you that if this property is developed, this is probably the only spot that feasibly could be developed with topography without extensive retaining walls and other very expensive aspects of this. But so we let the property drive that, and so I hate to say it this way, we kind of back into a building size based on what the property can support. So we grade a site out conceptually, and then we basically park this at a ratio that we think is commercially acceptable here. So approximately 30 spaces, yeah.
30 spaces, and that is aligned with the code for Morganton, or that's just sort of a general?
That's a
approximate?
general
Yep. Okay, cool.
feasibility study. So, and while I'm up here, happy to answer any other questions about feasibility, site feasibility.
I might just note that the feasibility, what's shown there would not meet the city zoning ordinance in terms of landscaping, where the sidewalk would need to go. Like, everything would need to be moved back on the site in order to meet the additional landscaping requirements and things that, I'm sorry, I forgot her
There,
name, but the
it's-
lady that spoke
oh.
about before the corridor requirements and things, so whether or not this is the exact building, but there are going to need to be additional things on that site as well, compared to what was presented there.
What's the buffer that's required of the corridor overlay? from the street?
They would be required to buffer the residential uses with, I'll just bring that up for everybody's reference. So your non-residential uses adjacent to those residential uses would need a 20-foot buffer between the residential property and anything on the subject site. They would also, the street yard would need to have a 5-foot sidewalk provision there, which there may be a sidewalk in that area, not entirely sure. And would need to be 10 feet wide in that area.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Happy to answer other feasibility questions if you have those that I could help with.
Yeah, maybe why, it does seem like it is quite centered, or it's kind of oriented right in that corner. Yeah, and there's left like a larger, extra sort of empty area towards the back that is, I guess my understanding is part of this application for rezoning. What's the reasoning behind that? Is that?
So it's topography for one, but we also will need to leave room for the stormwater
Oh, okay.
pond and the mechanism for the stormwater pond, and that's obviously the lowest part of the property to funnel.
Got it. So the back is sort of where stormwater would be directed.
Yes, ma'am.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
What was the proposed building size?
10,640 square feet.
They're not proposing anything, that was just an example.
Yeah.
I understand.
And to Ms. Williams's point, yes, certainly there's work to be done here to meet zoning requirements. This is just, again, feasibility conceptually, what may or may not work.
Lou, that might be, as you said, Judy, Lou, you asked that question earlier, and I said direct it to the applicant about what they were proposing to put on the
Oh,
site.
yeah,
Because we've had
yeah.
discussions
Retail-
about that.
Retail building of almost 11,000 square feet, right? Doesn't matter what the name is, correct?
That's-
May not even be
Correct.
that.
Well, it doesn't have to, it has to be retail.
11,000 square feet
Anything that's
building.
allowed
Allowed within
after you go through the
HID.
delta of the
Yeah,
quarter.
But if he wanted to ask that question about
Yes.
what they were
Yeah, I
proposing.
understand.
and
Yes.
that-
As I shared, my client, and the reason for this application, he develops residential cold dark shells, as we call them in the leasing world, and then he takes that out to market and finds users for that. So
Residential
that's
or retail?
commercial. So
So
it can
not
be
residential,
offices. There's
commercial.
a medical prosthetics sales store just down the road, just one side over from this. So that's what we're talking about. There's a landscaping and lawn service shop just on Gant, just again, one parcel over. So again, these are goods and services that serve the immediately surrounding community. You don't have users that drive zoning cases, you have developers that do, and then that provides them, something fungible to take and find an end user.
So the building could be 65 feet tall.
Yes.
How is that, I'm asking because I don't know, how is that a
If
negative
it was
to?
rezoned,
Yeah, yes, right, but how is that a negative to the surrounding, behind it, let's say? You have houses
So-
behind there?
one of the
It's a hell
things
of a
that you
slope
would
to
need to
get there.
consider is, so Chad, can you go to the aerial photo? So this structure is
Right.
not here. This is so you can see this jogged boundary line.
Right.
Is that boundary line that we showed.
Right.
This is an 800 square foot house.
Okay,
This is a 1,200 square foot house. This is a
Tiny house.
very tiny house. Don't know if it would meet today's standards, but is a 440 square foot house. Obviously, a bit of an anomaly there. So that's the surrounding, and then these houses across the street are probably similar to this 800 or 900 square foot house in there. They're all single story.
Right.
These, I believe, are 2-story down at the bottom of the hill, but they are
Okay, apartments.
quite, they're apartments, and as was mentioned, if we can turn on the contour lines, it does drop down
Yeah.
across the back there. And then the houses across the street here are all single-story houses over there. Actually, we can sort of drive down the street. There's that single-family house there. There's the Exhausted Rooster and Momentum Car Shop. This is kind of what it looks like today. That's that quite small house
Right.
there. And then, going on down the street as it enters into the residential neighborhood. That's why at the decision-making time period when the comprehensive plan was developed, that the line was drawn there at Sloan Avenue, was that you at least had some commercial businesses there, and then you didn't really get into anything that was on that main corridor. It became more of a neighborhood on both sides of the street. As was pointed out, the specific differences when setting up the mixed use and the mixed density neighborhood were these categories in here of whether you're going to have a lot of office and restaurant and retail or whether you're going to have a little bit of that. The neighborhood scale commercial uses, I can tell you, was 100% developed based on the current standard in the zoning ordinance in the difference between 3,000 square foot and under, and 3,000 square foot and over, being that those smaller ones were considered your neighborhood scale uses, and those larger ones are clearly serving a whole range of the community in there. So that were the discussions, and I'm just touching this because Lou came in at the very end of the comprehensive plan process. But that is where that line was drawn, and the intention is when you develop new zoning districts that are based on this comprehensive plan, to keep those smaller neighborhood scale uses of under the 3,000 square feet to be developed in there rather than these larger, kind of more big box type stores and those different uses.
And
That's
there was a
also
lot of
likewise-
public input about that, extensive. The consultants that helped do that plan did a great job of, trying to get as much public awareness of what's going on, including the current owner of this property, who never brought up the fact that he wanted to change the zoning at the time. Which, whatever, but it was, the question is scale, okay? What is a scalable, compatible use? And I think that what they've described as, these commercial shell buildings have a lot of use for a place like Morganton, and there are places zoned to accommodate that. This isn't one of them.
This table here is part of that, just because, I'm sorry, we're having to rescope our presentation on the fly here because the proposal changed during the presentation. So these uses, as was mentioned, 80% would be in residential uses. That's not actually accurate. That's why it says residential neighborhood. Residential neighborhood is that it is the intent to have other things besides residential in those neighborhoods, but of that smaller neighborhood scale. And when you go out of that neighborhood scale is when you ticked over into this mixed use area and trying to create a balance of, because we did at one point in the discussions in the comprehensive plan, every piece of the corridors was in that red color. And then we said, that's too much. That's everything everywhere. And you're not going to have space for those smaller residential uses and things if you've got a vape store on every corner. Sorry, and that's just because that's what we seem to be getting a lot of lately. Not saying that this is going to be a vape store in any way. But that was just too much. If you look at this map here, Chad, you put my screen back up. If you imagine every one of these thick black lines being ringed in red, that wasn't so West Fleming, East Fleming Drive, Sanford Drive, Kirksey Drive, Jamestown, South Sterling, Enola, Carbon City Road, North Green Street up 181. there was a specific intent not to make them connected, but to have these nodes in the plan. And there is actually this plan that talks about where those nodes should be, and to not have that specifically, to concentrate those mixed uses around those nodes. That's part of, I'm glad she pointed out, the overall plan and the overall strategy in the plan was to develop around those nodes and not to gradually shift it just a little bit further and just a little bit further and just a little bit further, because eventually then everything is covered by that. I think the choice that you guys have to make is whether or not this is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map that you have just developed to create this on the nodes, or to just create swaths of potential 10, 13,000 square foot retail or manufacturing or anything of that sort there so soon after you have adopted that plan, and whether or not that is, as Judy was saying, a reflection of what that community said when they went through the process of putting all of that input into the plan. Do we want this to continually creep into our neighborhoods, or do we want to have specific nodes where we know that commercial growth will grow adjacent to each other, or do we want and have healthy neighborhoods, or do we just want to have spots of particular zoning? Chad, if you go back to the map, if you want to just have spots, if I can find the one I made the colors on. Oh, it's on this one. Of those zones within the residential neighborhoods.
All entrances and exits will be on via South Sterling Street.
If they are only asking for that smaller part, yes, that'd be the only street that they touch.
How far is that from the traffic light there across from Berry and Nola Road? How far is that from that traffic light?
About
Get you,
out 150 yards
no, from there,
to that
from Enola
property.
Road?
To the traffic light at the intersection of
Old
Berry and
NC-18?
Nola Road.
Berry, it is 1,200 feet, roughly. So,
Quarter mile.
quarter mile. It's about,
Very
in
good.
fact, it's about a quarter mile from there, and then it's about a quarter mile to the other traffic lights at East Parker and West Parker Road. So roughly halfway between those spaces.
I just want to go back to what Keith was saying. So are we proceeding?
I don't know
That-
if
I
you
think
need
that
think
needs to
about
be-
it.
I question that.
Answered before we, to Judy's point, though, if it's, comes down to the board agreeing that this is spot zoning or not, if it's either way spot zoning, then that's something that we can look at. However, if the public was seeing the overall 6 acres as what it was being rezoned, I don't want to push this, to be honest, but I think from a legal perspective, we need to figure that out before we continue these conversations.
I concur. I think what they seem to be requesting and what we have in front of us, if we have to vote with what's in front of us, that's not what they're requesting. And I hate to say this again, but we may be put it off for another month and delineate specifically what we're looking at. Because there's a big question, I drove around this area, and if we're just talking a quarter frontage on South Sterling Street that fits the quarter overlay and doesn't include that whole property, I think that's two different questions. If we're talking something specifically on the quarter overlay that is limited, then that's a different question to look at.
Is that a determination whether or not that we've met that legal requirement, something the board can decide, or is that something we need to have our attorney?
I think that you guys need to vote on whether or not you'd like to proceed, or whether or not you would like to pause where we are, continue the application, re-advertise to the public with a different map, getting a specific shapefile from them of what they want to rezone, and proceed from there.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, please.
I appreciate the city attorney's comments on that, and I just wanted to add a few other things out there for y'all to consider as you think about that question. So the substantial change question that he raised, which is what you need to ask and answer. Generally speaking, following case law and statutory legislative discussion, that has been determined to mean is the request getting bigger, more intense, more impacting more people? and that is generally looked at as an increase of square footage, increase of area, increase of density, different access points, higher trip generation, that sort of thing. So I would submit to you that this is in fact the opposite because it has gotten much smaller. So the intensity, impact, scope, and scale is to the negative. And therefore, you actually over-advertised and were overly conservative in terms of letting the public know something was on the table. And then if you were to look into it as a member of the public, it's actually much smaller, narrower, and less of a footprint than was advertised. So I'll just throw that out there for consideration.
My question is specifically, what would we be voting on? Are we going to be voting on 2.3 acres or 6.08 acres? That's the question.
I don't think we've got the information that we can vote on the 2.38 acres, do we?
And you definitely don't have the standard maps that you normally have in
Right.
your application.
Plus, that was,
on
the
that.
public's never seen that,
That's correct.
right?
And they have not seen this drawing.
Would the board not be
Yeah.
putting themselves out there by voting on something that's, the public hasn't seen? I mean, I don't like that idea,
It's fair.
personally.
And I guess following up on what I said earlier, what are we, if you decide to grant this request and do a rezoning, what are you rezoning? And what does that include? What does that include? Does the rezoning request have to include enough area for the stormwater control measures as well? Or are we just talking about the building and the parking lot, or what are we talking about? I'm not saying I know the answer to that.
Can I speak up?
Please do. It's an open forum.
Zoning classifications and land usage kind of balance and go hand in hand. And if we go from one zone to another zone, that opens up a whole can of worms to a developer, landowner, to do what he would like to do, and maybe not in concert with what the neighbors or that neighborhood would like to see it as. So what I'm suggesting is, and it seems to me that the real bone of contention in all this request deals with the amount of square footage that could be developed on the existing property. And personally, looking at the table of uses for the current land as it's currently zoned, present to me enough development opportunities, economic opportunities to make it reasonable, that I would not see a need to have to go to a different zoning classification, which now creates the possibility of, oh, is it a spot zone or not? I could care less. What I care more about is the land usage that's being proposed.
And you're saying that's irregardless of, or regardless, I'm gonna debate over whether those are words, of whether you're doing the 2.3 acres or the 6.05?
Correct.
Okay.
Any questions?
No.
You have a map, well, you don't actually have that map, never mind. We got this a few minutes before.
It's on the slides.
thing, but you have it on the slide.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is whether or not that's, Chad, can you bring up that slide of the,
Feasibility map.
yeah. No, the one from the presentation that is a black and white plan? Yes. Of whether or not that outline that you have, which, the kind of weird space out to the side on the very back, is that part of the rezoning or not? At the rear of the part, there's a thick black line, but then there appears to be another thick black line attached to the side.
Little rectangle thing.
Rectangle, thank you.
Yeah, it's labeled, sorry, can't see it.
Not at all.
See it's temporary grading.
So that's not part of what you would like to rezone.
Just a feasibility sketch, right?
So it's a very specific plan for feasibility. No.
It was submitted as part of the application.
So what I think the board needs to determine
Yes.
is whether looking at that thick black outline, minus the rectangle on the northwestern side, is enough information for you to be able to understand what is being rezoned, A. B, whether or not that is, if that is sufficient, if you then think you can make a decision, and B, whether or not it's sufficient, given the change in lot size being smaller than, rather than larger, as was presented, would have potentially been of concern to the neighboring property owners that were, and the public that was advertised the application, noting the neighboring property owners are the ones that got the letters in April and May for this meeting. So, Chad, can you just leave that map up? So whether or not, knowing that we will have an exact meets and bounds of it, is sufficient, or whether you would like additional, for you to feel comfortable continuing the conversation, being able to vote on it, or whether you would like more information shown to us, and if you do want more information, if you could be specific, so that beyond just the normal maps that we would typically provide that you always have in your packet, showing it on the aerial photos, the current zoning, the future zoning, and the comprehensive plan map, et cetera, whether there is any other piece you would like.
Yeah, I guess one of my questions for the group to consider here is if they even come back with this, like what is our overall feeling that we would like to consider a change of this current zoning, or regardless of what they may or may not present here, are we comfortable changing that zoning? That's part of, I guess, what we're all considering, right? I don't also want to ask them to redo something if that's not going to dramatically change how any of us feel about this. Part of my,
I agree.
so.
So should we, I'm looking at Keith, maybe? Would it be appropriate for you to take a vote on whether or not you want to continue to consider the proposal with, sorry, Chad, the map that's on the screen, which the applicants can see as well, and being and I must note that our screens up here are not super clear, but I think everyone can, does everyone think they can see the outline of what needs to be rezoned? So everyone's clear on what we're asking without having to, and then I suppose you probably need to vote on whether or not you want to continue and feel comfortable continuing the conversation based on all of the information that we've heard about the substantial changes, et cetera.
Okay.
On that.
We would take a formal vote?
I think that you should.
I'll make a motion to continue.
I don't know if we need a motion, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to continue.
To continue the discussion, okay? Do you have a second?
So,
Okay, all those in favor of continuing the discussion?
All right.
Nah.
Okay, great.
And those opposed?
Oh,
To continue the discussion with the revised, with the revised proposal.
Right, today.
now.
right now.
Right now.
Continue having, I think you need to
It's okay.
give everybody
May
to say
8th.
who is opposed.
2025.
Is anyone opposed to continuing this discussion in this meeting, given the current information we now feel more clarity upon? Is anyone opposed to continuing the?
Feel free. Yes.
No one is opposed, so we are going to continue having this
So
discussion.
we're looking at it as just the smaller portion. That
Yes,
would be the only portion that would be rezoned.
yes. So Chad, you can put my screen up. That might be more clear with the red outline. I don't know. Let me see if I can. I was going to see if I could transfer this outline.
Doing anything else?
God forbid, to another picture.
I think, I mean, I understand where it's,
Are you clear on all of that?
I guess I'm having a hard time putting my head around all these parcels that are gonna be split, have split zoning in them. And I think if you start doing that, it gets to be very messy. If we do it here, and then we do it out Jamestown Road, and then we do it out 70, you're gonna have a lot of these places like that, that if you split that zoning, you're only allowing a small portion of what remains of that property to be used as the original.
yeah, but that's the property owner's problem. Right.
Well, I understand
I
that.
mean,
I
that's
understand
his
that.
problem, not yours.
and they'll go through a recombination plat of all the other parcels and,
They just recombine the balance into one
Right.
parcel.
They mitigate that with the price of what they're selling, right? I mean,
That is not necessarily an onerous process. There would be some time involved. I don't know how close they are to being ready to do so. But that's certainly, I suppose, a question that you can ask them as to how long they would intend to leave it split, if you wish.
I mean, I don't think we have any jurisdiction over how long they plan to leave it that way.
Likely not.
Correct. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter to ask that question.
I'm trying to create you another map. I'm listening.
I really think that we have enough information based on even their concept plan to show you the broad outlines. When it gets put into an official meets and bounds survey, it's not going to vary much from their concept plan that they've submitted. So I guess you just have to decide whether or not that change is appropriate. Honestly, I'm not too worried about the public notice part because, as their attorney explained, it's going from, a more intense plan to a reduced in scope intensity. And maybe less owners would have gotten a letter based on the zoning, but, the mistake is people were over-informed. I think that's a sin we could live with, personally.
Yep.
But, really, I think the crux of the matter is whether or not you think a portion is appropriate to rezone or not. I mean, that's the upshot of this at this point.
I did try to throw that onto an aerial photo. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone, but it does show you the neighboring, I think that was your question, Lou, the neighboring property owners.
Right.
So you can see the two houses there, the development across the street, also on Grant Street, noting that's where Grant Street does not connect to South Sterling due to the topography. And noting that Sloan Avenue at this point, where that line is, you can see the little line there, it becomes a private street. So it's not a city street. So I think there was a question about accessing South Sterling. I'm not sure if that's helpful, but I'm trying.
Pretty good.
Thank you.
Okay. At this point, does the commission have any additional questions for the public they would like to have? Okay, so then I'm going to close the public portion of the,
For me?
or for, yeah, or for
Do
Wendy.
you have any, any other questions for anybody? Because then, once it gets closed.
Okay, I'm going to close that. Great. Okay, so the next, does anyone want a motion in any direction on this proposal?
Well, we have discussion first.
Oh, yeah.
I
Well,
think you make the motions, and if you make the motions, then you have discussion, and then you can vote.
that's what
So
I was
you're,
told.
you're making a motion to discuss.
Okay, this is where we have plastic bottles because you can't get hurt.
Yes.
Throws at you. I make a motion that we accept the proposal to change it from the MDI to an HDI. HID, excuse me. Dyslexic.
It's been a confusing evening.
Is there a second? Or no, we're going to discuss now.
No, you have a second, and then you discuss, right?
Is there a second for
yeah, I'll
that?
second it.
Okay, there's a second. What do you guys like to discuss before we vote? Great.
Anyone?
I think, Judy, you did not agree with that.
Did you have a?
Oh, well, I'll vote no.
Yeah, okay. Got any other comment for it? That's
Did
fine.
you have any
That's why
comment
we have
that you
plastic
wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm generally agreeing. I'm probably closer to what Judy's thought is that we have made this decision pretty recently to put the zoning as it lies, and I don't see a huge upshot of changing this particular parcel, but I'm open to hear other people's opinions.
Okay, I'll give you opinion. I think this is a main corridor that comes into the city, and the corridor overlay has got a lot of protections to it on the appearance and everything else. We worked very hard on that. Having said that, you come off the interstate and you're coming into town, and you're basically looking at a commercial district. And 3,000 square foot is 30 foot by 100. That's like a lot of shops we have downtown that are empty because we have nothing that fits in something that small. It's not economically feasible to run a business in something that small. So if we want to have a corridor overlay that comes off and people see and I just did a bunch of traveling way, if I come off an exit and I just see a residential area, I turn around and I head back out. And I look for some place where I want to see some businesses and something that's going to drive me in there. If it doesn't, and we have the initial, and to say there's spot planning, Sterling Street is spot all the way along. You see this little potpourri, and now we're simply questioning what size shop is in this potpourri. So what we're literally saying is, are we going to make, okay, I'll use it my way, and this is where some people may get upset with me. Well, we keep looking backwards and seeing here's what we've had, here's the way we've done it, and we don't get any development, or are we going to look forward and say we want development, we want to develop Sterling Street, we want to make it look attractive, and we're going to allow business sizes large enough to survive because the economics of a 3,000 square foot thing is very, very limited. So if we're going to develop Sterling Street as a corridor into the city, then I think you have to go with this.
If the building is pushed out of that corridor overlay, it doesn't have to comply with those restrictions, the facade.
Correct.
So they could push that building back out of the corridor overlay, and then that could be a metal building.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct.
But their landscaping, parking requirements, or parking
It would be
field would have
only
to.
the parking landscaping section of it. If
Okay.
they are out of the corridor overlay, they could do gravel parking behind the rear of the building. They wouldn't have to have the asphalt parking.
How many feet is that overlay?
250 feet
Okay.
From center line or,
from the edge of the
From the edge
right
of
of
the
way is
right-of-way.
generally how it's measured.
okay, 250 feet.
So
Yeah.
if you, it
How
is
long
not
is that?
exact on this map. So it'd be a little bit further than this, so that is an item that would be unclear as to, on the proposal, as to what portion of the building may or may not. Again, noting that it may or may not be a building that size.
Well, I think the topo also comes into play anyways with that, so.
But, I mean, this is a long, narrow building. It could be a long, narrow building the other way with the parking in the front and out of the corridor overlay. If I understand your question being, could they develop a building on this site without having to meet those upgraded standards? Yes, is the answer to that.
Is there any further discussion? Or would you like to vote?
Did we get a second on that?
There was a second.
Yeah, I second.
There was a motion. You guys ready to vote?
Any other- yeah.
So the motion was to approve the change, just to be clear.
The motion was to approve the change and to accept changing it to a HID versus a MID.
Great. Just want to make sure that's clear for everyone as we vote. Okay.
If you make that motion, you do have to also add a specific statement that you are making a motion that is inconsistent with your comprehensive plan. That's state law. So,
Okay, this is inconsistent with the generalities of the comprehensive plan, which I went to all those meetings, you know.
That you are accepting it as they proposed or as it was submitted?
with the revised lot size
Yes, correct,
So 2.3
380 acres.
correct.
and the relevant overlays.
Does the motion need to address corridor overlay, or
Yes, it needs to address all of the relevant overlays for the
Yes,
site.
I don't have that verbiage in
you
front of
have
me, but
2.38
You do,
acres.
if you can.
you do? Thank you.
Yeah, you do.
You do, actually.
Page 13. That could be any.
Yep, so you would just need to change the one.
Hey, Don. If that's how we're gonna make the motion, we're approving 2.38 acres, but we just, what I'm going back to this, we don't know what those 2.38 acres
Yeah,
are.
they could be the back of the lot.
Well, you have
As
think you
submitted
can-
by this,
As submitted.
As submitted.
included
by
this
this drawing.
proposal.
Yes.
Yes.
You're gonna have to say a lot of words, Pete.
Starting here.
From the
Let's see if
top.
I can wordsmith
Yeah.
this for you.
Well, I'll read the whole thing.
No, I just need to figure out.
Should throw rocks at me when I pass by with the dog. Aaron, are there clear dimensions on that drawing?
I think they presented, there were meets and, call lines on there. Meets and bounds.
I cannot read it as,
Oh,
as
if
it's
you can't read it,
printed.
We can't read it on the printed out version, but they submitted that they had call points, survey call points on there, yes.
I know, same here. My dinner's cold.
How deep that rock is?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think we
Okay,
should look at that.
perfect. Thank you.
have-
That's
have a
very
look.
helpful.
It's on, if you wanted to reference what's in the slideshow, it's there too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
460 feet.
So as long as this is submitted, or as submitted, then,
Yeah.
yeah, then we're clear.
Thank you. I'll share.
It would be stupid, right, yeah. I mean,
But here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
oh, you got an extra one? That'd be great.
What I do not have,
I get this one, thank you. Yeah.
why you consider it
We
appropriate.
can, I guess.
Don't need to see this.
This is the topography here, sloping down, right? Yeah, I mean,
So they don't have the quarter shown here.
I agree with you, just. That 2.38.
Probably need one set of
30 feet.
conversations.
Yeah, if you guys could just, if we could,
Guys,
if you're gonna
Jackie has to
speak,
make
that
notes.
that's fine, but just maybe speaking for the record, just given that I don't wanna have too many side conversations, I think it's just.
Oh, I'm sorry. we're
No, it's
just
okay.
talking about
Yeah, absolutely.
dimensions.
And I think it would be helpful though if you note something that we could all be privy
Well,
to your.
We're not, what we were discussing
ahas.
was the feasibility of building this building anywhere else because of the topography.
Yep.
If you look at it, it drops off pretty
But we're
significantly.
remembering, they're not building this building.
Okay, but any building.
Any building,
Any
any
building
use
of
of
that
this site.
size, you're sort of stuck with a
They
placement
wouldn't have.
similar to where this is shown.
Yeah, the lot is the lot.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, is grading not possible? I mean,
It's expensive.
it is expensive, absolutely.
you know.
I very much recognize that. Just doing some wordsmithing here, so we can read the appropriate motion. Did y'all have other?
I have just. You have to say this first part. If you can read my handwriting, you have to read this part.
Yep.
And then if you would like to make reasons why you consider it appropriate, that's something you typically do so that you can make a comparison decision later, but that's not required. The top part is required so that we know what you're doing.
Okay, here we go, guys. Proposed motion. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommends the City Council approve the proposal rezoning a portion of the following lots totaling 2.3 acres
As
Of-
as shown
as shown.
in Exhibit A, which we are going to table this plan as Exhibit A. Right there, 18.
Of 1807 South Sterling Street. Want to read the PIN numbers too? I'll read the PIN numbers.
I think you have to read the PIN numbers because there are two
Okay, PIN number
of the same address.
270338055895 and 1807 South Sterling Street, PIN number 2703805984 and 0 Sloan Avenue, PIN number 2703817100 and 0 Sloan Avenue, PIN number 2703817001 and 0 Sterling Forest Drive, PIN number 2703816393. Let's see. From being zone medium intensity district with corridor overlay, watershed protection overlay, and airport helicopter safety overlay to zone high intensity district with the corridor overlay, watershed protection overlay, and airport and helicopter safety overlay. This proposal is inconsistent with the city's adopted
Imagine.
imagined 2040 comprehensive plan. This plan is considered appropriate.
Proposal.
This proposal is considered appropriate because of the spot nature of the businesses along South Sterling Street, which are in themselves inconsistent with the continuous of one particular zoning designation.
Okay,
Good job.
thank you. All of those in favor of approving? We got a second.
We had a second.
We had a second, yeah.
Yep.
You're good, you got a second, yep.
Oh,
In favor? Those opposed?
now we tried.
Okay,
Is there
that's,
an alternative?
it did not pass. Yes.
3-5. 3-5.
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3-6. Thank you.
Got it. Okay, so then what is their next
Is there an
potential?
alternative, you guys can make an alternative motion to, well, it's not been approved, but do you have to have a motion to deny it? No? Sorry. It's been very
No, it
long.
didn't pass.
Yeah, it didn't pass,
Very good.
so that's fine. Do they have recourse to appeal our decision?
Go to the, it goes to the city council.
It goes to city
Goes to
council
city
now.
council.
Yeah,
You're making a recommendation, so it will
Yeah.
go to city council.
we just
and
make the
then they will go through
recommendation
that
as
process.
voted on by the commission. You can still speak to city council for your,
But you didn't
proposal.
make. I- Yeah, so you have denied, so by default, you've denied it. Because you have not voted to appeal it. I think you have to make an alternative motion to deny it. You don't have a ruling, you've just not voted to approve it.
I'll
So
make a
you need to make a
motion.
motion to deny it, if that is the will of the remainder. Yes, that's what I was saying. Yeah. Yeah, and then you kind of invert what Pete said. Sorry.
that's fair.
I'll make a motion to deny the request as presented with the concept plan.
I'll second.
Just a second. Okay, would we like to have any further discussion about that?
Do I need to read this whole proposed motion?
Yes, you do, but before that, we need to see if anybody has any discussion on this motion, and if you would like to give any further discussion on that, but just for
We
procedure.
talked this one.
So,
Okay.
then you can vote.
Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to the City Council denial of the proposed rezoning of 1807 South Sterling Street, a portion of PIN 2703, 805, 895, 807 South Sterling Street, PIN 2703, 805, 984, 0 Sloan Avenue, portion of PIN 27038171100, 0 Sloan Avenue, PIN 27038170001, and 0 Sterling Forest Drive, PIN 27038166393, shown on the Imagine 2040 Comprehensive Plan Future Land Use Map as mixed-density residential neighborhood land from Zone Medium Intensity District with Corridor Overlay, Watershed Protection Overlay, and Airport Heliport Safety Overlay to Zone High Intensity District with Corridor Overlay, Watershed Protection Overlay, and Airport Heliport Safety Overlay. The proposal is considered inappropriate for the following reasons. The development of the site with high-intensity uses is inconsistent with the expectations set forth in the Imagine 2040 Comprehensive Land Use Plan for the site for neighborhood scale, primarily residential uses. The permitted uses and density and dimensional standards of Zone HID include uses and standards that could have the potential off-site impacts that would not be favorable to and could have significant negative impacts on the existing residential dwellings in the locality, and the proposal would be spot rezoning.
Okay, all those voting in favor of the denial of the proposal.
You need a second.
No, we have a second. Greg seconded. Yeah.
All those in favor, as it was read, vote yes.
Aye.
Affirmative.
6-3.
Okay, all those opposed? Okay, consistent with our previous vote. We have
They can still appeal it to the
done
city.
it both ways. Okay, very good. All right, so,
May I get an official understanding of
certainly.
what the discrepancy was about the 2 days of going council and recommendation?
I'm sorry, I can't hear
She, the
you.
10 days, there's a, can anyone perhaps,
Understanding was that this was a recommendation.
It's a recommendation to city council.
There's no need for us to appeal within 10 days.
No, not at this time period, because we don't have a formal decision on it. It's just a recommendation to council. Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for your
Yes.
deliberation. I apologize for the
And
Really?
it will go to city council on,
June 2nd, is that a 2025 at 6 PM in these chambers. Great. Do we have any further items of discussion for this evening? We do not. The next.
Who's buying?
The next Planning and Zoning scheduled meeting is for June 12th at 5:15, also in these chambers. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you all for your